Stormwatch updates are brought to you by Burger King, reminding island residents to keep informed and stay safe. IT&E, connections that matter. KFC, it's finger licking good. And SPPC 76 Circle K, take it easy.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Just to present some of the latest information on our intensifying typhoon, we are starting to see the eye emerge in the visible satellite imagery. It has been obscured by high-level cloud all night long, but we're starting to see that trend change. The Guam is right up here in the far northwest corner of this visible satellite. We do have some showers pushing over the area, made for decent race conditions for the Coco race, but just east of the islands, we're seeing some of the very far outer bands starting to wrap into this typhoon. And so we could stand to see some of these showers starting to move into the islands as we head into the nighttime, early Monday morning hours. And here on the current radar, we do see those heavier showers about 80 to 100 miles to the east. Once those showers start moving in, we can definitely stand to expect strong gust with the heavier showers. Go ahead into the nighttime expecting it. These are the far peripheral conditions of the approaching typhoon. Looking at some of the satellite imagery that we received overnight here at the Weather Service, we definitely see that well-formed eye that is starting to become quite apparent, both in the low level and the upper level convection signatures. And that really signifies a fairly intense typhoon. The outlook is still for continued intensification. We've been receiving some questions, some folks on social media asking, are there two systems? Are there two eyes going on? And when we go back to the visible satellite, yes, there are some significant cloud cover to the east, but there is only one typhoon that we are looking at. The winds are flowing counterclockwise. There is only one tropical cyclone that we are watching out to the east. That is just very heavy showers within the convergence of southwesterly south winds and the easterly winds coming out from farther to the east. So there is only one tropical cyclone that we are watching, and there is the expectation for only the one. So I want to make sure that is abundantly clear to go ahead and kill some of those rumors going out. There's our typhoon, continues to move toward the Marianas. Some of the other wind data, yes, we're seeing those stronger winds at the center. To the north, 25 to 35 knot winds extend well to the north. So we're going to be seeing those winds starting to pick up in advance of Typhoon Sinlaku tonight, probably more notably through the wind gust. The sustained winds at nighttime tend to drop down a little bit, but the stronger gusts will start to be more apparent, especially as showers come into the area. And then after daybreak, Monday morning, we'll start seeing those sustained winds start to increase. Some of the other satellite data, the high resolution ocean surface winds, is definitely indicating very strong winds within the eye wall of Typhoon Sinlaku. The purples, the whites are indicative of 80 plus knots. So we're pushing 90, 100 mile per hour winds near this eye feature. We've been watching the track trends. Yesterday, the day before, we were looking at tracks that were centered right over Guam. And the main message was, while we had a nearly stationary tropical storm, low-end typhoon in Chuuk State, the big question was, at what point is it going to finally break away from Chuuk State? And in what manner is it going to lift out of Chuuk State? We expected an eventual northwest motion, but it took on an initially slightly more northerly exit, but it is hooking more to the northwest. And so we have seen that northwest motion fairly steady in the overnight hours. So we are seeing the system finally lift out of Chuuk State and easing some of the conditions very slowly across the Micronesian islands. But we are now setting our sights on the Marianas. The track has shifted northward the past couple of editions, starting with the 8 p.m. Saturday evening, the 2 a.m. this morning, and then also the 8 a.m. advisory. And we're awaiting the new advisory from midday today that we suspect could see yet another slight shift northward with the global model guidance. Some things to take away from these shifts. The global models are showing this, and perhaps we're getting a better agreement, especially as the typhoon is exiting Chuuk State. That worst impact threat of a Cat 4 typhoon condition is now centered more on Rhoda. It does not reduce the threat completely for Guam because we are still very close to it, and track shifts are still anticipated as we go through the next 36 hours. But ultimately for Rhoda, the threat has now become much greater. They already had that threat going into yesterday, and it's just grown a little bit more. Category 3, 4 typhoon conditions, not as significant, but they are not zero. And so that is something that we need to continue to keep in mind as we prepare for typhoon conditions on Guam. For Tinian Saipan, the threat is increasing for typhoon conditions. Yesterday, we were looking at strong tropical storm conditions, and now that potential is starting to increase for typhoon conditions. We are looking at the potential for a short window of a super typhoon classification. 150 miles per hour could be achieved right here as we go into Monday evening, early Tuesday. 150 mile per hour, high-end Cat 4 super typhoon. So this is going to be a significant typhoon. It has been the expectation that we're going to be looking at a significant typhoon approaching the Marianas. And so all of the lower Mariana Islands are within the expansive wind field. As we look at this cone, and we've been talking about the cone, that is the important feature that expresses that uncertainty in the downrange track. That white shaded area indicates where, based on the past 5 years of track errors, the center of a tropical cyclone stays 66% of the time. Guam, not necessarily right in the crosshairs, is still pretty close to the center. And so while we see these beneficial for Guam, these beneficial northward shifts, we're still pretty close. So don't let your guard down. Looking at the strong tropical storm, 50-knot wind speed probabilities, Guam is sitting right about 50%, 50 to 60% of seeing those significant, that strong tropical storm winds of 50 knots or greater. We're going to see those numbers continue to rise as we go forward in time and with subsequent forecast track updates from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. Now, how do we calculate these? How do we calculate these probabilities? This is a Super Typhoon U2 back in 2018 as it approached the Marianas. There are programs that the National Hurricane Center uses to take the Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecast track and then creates 1,000 simulations, approximate forecast tracks. Some are faster arriving, some are slower arriving, some veer to the north, some veer to the south. And so there's 1,000 realistic scenarios centered around the official forecast track. So some of those conditions that are taken into account are there on the right side of your screen. So those 1,000 simulations are what are used to create these probabilities. As we look at the typhoon force wind speed probabilities, yesterday for Guam, we were looking at 30 to 40%. We've kind of plateaued with the track shifts to the north. We're plateaued at the 30 to 40% chance. That's still significant. We're still at the brunt of seeing typhoon conditions across all of the Marianas, including Guam. So those northward shifts, while beneficial in redirecting the Category 4 conditions, those typhoon force winds still extend a good distance away from the center. So just to show those track shifts over time, and this is normal in tropical cyclone forecasting, especially when you start with 5 days out in your forecast tracks. but it has been pretty close. Really, we're only seeing about a 50-mile shift from southern Guam yesterday morning or Friday evening to Rota as of this morning. And in the grand scheme of things, that's not a bad forecast. It's pretty consistent. But the question is, will this northward shift persist? This was Typhoon Mawar in 2023. And we talk about this, the white shaded cone area. As Typhoon Mawar approached Guam, we were looking at a forecast to pass south or over southern Guam. As it approached the day of, we saw that eventual shift, that bobble more northward to eventually focus more on northern Guam. All these little shifts, these bobbles, that was well within that cone area. That was well within that 66% chance of the TC center staying within it. But it did result in significant difference of impacts between North and South Guam. What we eventually saw in northern Guam with that nearby passage was far worse than what we saw in southern Guam. It could have been completely reversed had Typhoon Mawar stayed on the south side. And so this is what is important to keep in mind as we look at this cone with our Typhoon Sinlaku still approaching the Marianas. We're still deep within that cone. So continue to prepare for typhoon conditions and stand ready to listen for upcoming information, some future track shifts as we go into the 2 p.m. this afternoon, 8 p.m. tonight. Every 6 hours, we're going to get new forecast track updates from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. Regarding the arrival time, yesterday we were looking at the arrival of tropical storm winds for Guam at Monday morning, late Monday morning. The latest tracks reflect a slightly slower motion, and so as a result, we're seeing a slight delay in the onset of those tropical storm conditions. So for Guam, we are looking Monday evening or Monday night. Perhaps the earliest reasonable arrival time based on those 1,000 realistic simulated tracks, Monday night. For the most likely arrival time, there on your right, it could actually be a little bit after midnight, Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And then things will continue to deteriorate from then on. So some key points for the Marianas. We're going to start to separate the islands as we get a little bit closer to the arrival of Typhoon Sinlaku. Right now, since it is still a day and a half away, there's still quite a bit of variability. Who's going to exactly see the worst conditions, and what can each island across the Marianas anticipate? Once those conditions start to become more distinct, we're going to separate these conditions out by island. But right now, we're sitting with a typhoon watch for Guam, Rota, and Saipan that was issued yesterday, Saturday the 11th, early in the afternoon. Our warning consideration is going to be keyed in on the 24-hour onset of tropical storm conditions. So with that delay in the onset of tropical storm conditions to Monday night, we're going to be looking at conditions throughout the day and make some decisions. It's all going to be dependent on the track trends, and that's what we're going to be really looking on here in the operations and gathering some thoughts from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. So again, Monday evening, Monday night for the onset of tropical storm conditions. Typhoon conditions seem to be centered on Tuesday daytime. So probably from early Tuesday morning until late Tuesday evening, we see that greatest threat for the typhoon conditions. We're still looking at about a 48-hour window of damaging winds or greater. So tropical storm sustained winds 39 miles per hour or greater. That rainfall threat still remains. It is a large typhoon, expansive cloud deck, and so that rainfall flooding related threat is still persistent for all four of our islands in the Marianas. The greatest threat, of course, would be closer to the center And we're going to be looking at those numbers as we go through the day, but we still have a flood watch in effect for all of the Marianas as we anticipate increasing heavy rainfall with the approach, passage, and the exit of Typhoon Sinlaku. We still have the hazardous marine conditions that will steadily deteriorate as the winds pick up in our region. In advance of Typhoon Sinlaku's arrival, we're likely to see a growing swell affecting the southeastern shores of Guam and the rest of the islands. Peak sea conditions could be 25 to 35 feet, especially near the center and especially in the Marianas between Tuesday and early Wednesday. The main threat is for the storm surge. Looking at some of the latest guidance out of the National Hurricane Center in Miami, we're looking at the threat of 4 to 7 feet storm surge. That's the still water rise measured at the tide gauges, Pago Bay and Upper Harbor. 4 to 7 foot windward storm surge, and that's going to be largely on the shores facing into the wind. The greatest threat is going to be near the center, but if we continue to see northward shifts in the forecast track, then that storm surge threat will decrease for Guam. It will increase across the CNMI. Additionally, to the storm surge is the wind and the wave-driven run-up that's going to send that water rushing up onto the beaches higher than just the normal state. We could see the big steps of erosion higher up on the shorelines and pushing into the foliage. So that's going to be one of the concerns. Finally, impacts largely unchanged, at least in the conditions, the threats to infrastructure and what all. The focus shifts more to ROTA with the latest track trends. And we're going to be looking at the upcoming updates from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center to see what those impacts might do regarding Tinian and Saipan, where there seems to be a growing likelihood for those typhoon conditions. The flood threat is largely pinned on where the center of Typhoon Sinlaku transits. Regarding uncertainty, we're seeing decreasing uncertainty. That confidence in the forecast is growing as we get closer. That white cone around the forecast track is getting narrower as we get closer to the arrival of Typhoon Sinlaku. We're still expecting to see small shifts in the forecast track, as is typical with tropical cyclone forecasting, but we're still looking at a major typhoon approaching Guam, Rota, Tinian, Saipan, and it's going to be close. Keep your guard up, continue preparing, and we're going to be watching those trends and communicating those trends. So where are we right now? Typhoon watch. Those typhoon force winds, 74 miles per hour, are possible. And we are soon approaching that shorter timeline of the 24 to 30 hours. But right now we're still within 48 hours. So typhoon conditions are possible. They could happen. They might not happen. There is that uncertainty that remains in the forecast track. If we continue to see northward shifts, that will ultimately lessen the likelihood of typhoon conditions on Guam. Still, the tropical storm wind field is massive around the system. And so that's going to be one of our considerations later on today as we look at the updated forecast tracks out of the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. So for right now, we're sitting with a typhoon watch, but we're going to be looking at the forecast track, the timing of the onset of tropical storm conditions, and then we're going to be making some decisions as we go forward. But the bottom line is expect to see winds and seas increasing as we continue into tonight and into Monday. We've got a lot of hazards. You can find those on our webpage at weather.gov/GUM, and that will be updating every 6 hours